Welcome to Real History. My name is Jared Frederick. Ever since my youth, I've been transfixed by historical tales depicted in film. Growing up while watching Turner Classic Movies and AMC in their heydays, old war movies were a staple of my childhood and formed my earliest impressions of the Second World War. One film that stands out in my memories is the John Wayne drama entitled Sands of Iwo Jima. Even as a youngster, I found many of its depictions and dialogue cliché. Even so, such movies served as a springboard for new discoveries and visits to my local library. Only years later did I learn that my own grandfather, Signalman First Class David E. Frederick, was himself a witness to the violent struggle that unfolded on the volcanic island of Iwo Jima. Not until a decade after his passing did I learn of the incredible story of him and his shipmates. As additional movies about that battle were released during my college years, my interest only grew. I someday resolved to visit the island myself. In 2019, I had the rare opportunity to book an expedition ticket to the island via the Iwo Jima Association of America and Military Historical Tours in preparation of the battle's 75th anniversary in March 2020. But my plans were ultimately halted with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. I waited an additional 3 years until the world returned to a degree of normalcy. The United States returned the island to Japan during the Vietnam War, and it has been difficult for American civilians to visit the site ever since. But each March, a reunion of honor takes place in which U.S. veterans of the battle and a select handful of visitors have the chance to explore the iconic landscape. On March 25th, 2023, I did exactly that. In this rare virtual walking tour of Iwo Jima, I hope to share with you a sense of the landscape and its countless scars of battle. For many of the relatives of Iwo Jima veterans, I realize you may never be able to visit in person. So I hope this video offers a better sense of the struggles your loved ones overcame. I know I walked away with a renewed appreciation of what transpired there in 1945.
We are former enemies and now we're friends. And the transition from being enemies to being friends has taken time for some. But the widow of Lieutenant General Kobayashi, who commanded the forces here when we landed, expressed it very succinctly for us in 1995 when she said, "Former enemies, now friends. And together, we must not let this type of warfare happen again."
Our story begins at the base of operations for our trip, the Dusit Thani Guam Resort. On D-Day, our trip to Iwo Jima, and everybody's very well dressed. The reason for this being is that the Japanese consider this ceremony to be a funeral. It's our equivalent of going to a burial service at Arlington National Cemetery. So as you can see here, minus the workers who are in their Star Trek-like red shirts, all the men are expected to wear a jacket and a tie. As we explored the Guam battlefields in the days leading up to our arrival on Iwo, I gained a true respect for one of our guides, James Oki Farley. James is an expert on the Marianas Campaign and previously worked as the Cultural Resources Program Manager at the War in the Pacific National Historical Park. Being a former park ranger myself, I knew this was the man to follow once we arrived. We set out immediately once we disembarked our plane on Airfield 2, one of the very strips being fought over when the United States invaded.
Yeah.
We are currently walking south toward Mount Suribachi.
So just past this barracks, you'll start seeing a lot of the stuff on the left-hand side that they dug out of the caves here. See the banyan tree? Fully regrown since the battle. See how all their barracks buildings are flat roofed? So you get super typhoons that roll through here and destroy the buildings. So they've got to construct them with the idea of 180 mile an hour winds, sustained 10 to 12 hours. And the base still has to be able to survive. You want to keep your people safe. So you end up building these barracks to be pretty hardcore. Almost all the typhoons that spin up out of the Micronesia develop down by the equator and start roaring across the Pacific because there's nothing up here to stop them. Slams right into Iwo. They've had some massive destruction here over the years, including 2 years before the battle. Morning, Marine. How you doing?
Good, pretty good, sir.
Right on. Good, good.
Morning.
Find a little shade back in there?
Yes, sir.
Smart man. Very smart man. That temporary construction building is still there. This thing's been there 8 years. That's awesome. Not so temporary. All right, so this is the entrance of the complex that stopped the 4th Marine Division. The top of the wall.
If you are seeking a concise read on the battle, check out Colonel Joseph Alexander's Closing In, Marines in the Seizure of Iwo Jima, linked below. I will be quoting this work frequently throughout our tour. The author notes, the 3,000 yards of black sand along the southeastern coast appeared more sheltered from the prevailing winds. Here, the amphibious corps would land on D-Day. The 4th Marine Division on the right, the 5th on the left, the 3rd in reserve. The initial objectives included the lower airfield, the west coast, and Suribachi. Then the force would swing into line and attack north, shoulder to shoulder.
It's part of a B-29. They just recently put out there. That's new.
Wow.
The B-29 Super Fortress's prop. Engine cowlings.
There's something you don't see
it's
every
a
day.
Globemaster. Crash Globemaster. It's not a B-29.
Oh, this.
37 millimeter.
Unfortunately, I somehow forgot to film more footage of this on my trek back. But let's pause and take a closer look at some of these rusty relics. The 37mm were quick-fire anti-tank guns used by the Japanese throughout the 1930s and 1940s. Thanks to the clever defenses laid out by General Tadamichi Kurabayashi, such weapons were put to lethal use here. The 25mm were automatic cannons often used by the Imperial Japanese Navy, but frequently installed on coastal fortifications ranging from Iwo Jima to the Aleutians. The presence of propellers, shells, aircraft noses, and more truly speaks to the time capsule-like environment of this place.
So this goes up in a bowl, shapes back around over where you see the large antenna, the aerial antenna with the ball on it. It's the far west side of the amphitheater and the meat grinder. That's where the 3rd Marine Division would pass through the lines of the 4th, where they would attach the 1st Regimental Combat Team to Kate's men, the 9th, and then 21st came up through them and took the center of the island and started the drive going back north. 4th was still pinned down here at the hinge. The rock quarry is right beyond these buildings, going back down over the next ridge. It's the top of the golf course. It was built into the amphitheater.
While some combat locations were named by elevation, others took on grim personalities of their own. Hill 382, the so-called amphitheater, and Turkey Knob consisted of a vast defensive complex that became known as the Meat Grinder.
The bear of this is you do all this walking and then a bus goes flying past you. Happens every year. You see the agave plants out there? That's the spiky plants, they call them Spaniards. That's what you make tequila out of. They have long needles on the ends of them that'll go right through your legs.
Wow.
What's interesting is we saw those here, and they also appear in the battlefields in Guam in the same area as the 3rd Marine Division. And so we were trying to figure out if they've been in the socks or the seeds have been spread, because pre-war photos, we don't see those.
Please pardon my shaky camera work here. My trusted producer Andy was back home, and this was a technological trial by fire for me.
So you start to see the cave systems in the wall right there on the other side of the course. There's a cave over there big enough to drive a truck through. See the back cave right there? Collapsed right underneath the ball.
When American aerial bombing commenced here in December 1944, Kuribayashi moved everything from command posts, aid stations, barracks, and weapons underground. Masked and interconnected positions like these provided ideal interlocking fields of fire for defenders.
When do we get to shed the...
As far as I'm concerned, take them off now and put them in your backpacks. I only wear it if I'm at the actual ceremony.
Once again, dress formality was a big sticking point.
So this is the top of the quarry. It's really interesting that they're working up here. They must be finding all kinds of things. So right there, you see that big blockhouse? Right down on the top of the cliff? That's the top of the quarry. The quarry wall drops straight off behind that. Another major blockhouse right there. Those are 4-foot thick walls, dual reinforced. Is he yelling at her?
Yes.
Because she went bare sleeved. She's trying to change out a layer and put her sleeves back on.
Yes, women in our group were actually reprimanded for shedding layers of clothing.
Right up here on the left is a really cool cave.
Did you give back the sunblock?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's right here.
Okay. I'll put a little bit more on, I think.
Yeah, probably.
Your beard looks awesome.
Yeah, looks like Santa Claus.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'll put some on my arms here for a little while.
Rather not keep burning like a lobster.
On Iwo, sunblock is as vital as water. As we lathered up, I was reminded of historical footage of Marines covering their faces to protect their skin from the heat and light of the naval gun blasts. Luckily for me, I was not exposed to anything so intense.
So that's we call it a woodpecker.
Miles of tunnels linked key defensive positions. Every cave featured multiple outlets and ventilation tubes. One installation inside Mount Suribachi ran 7 stories deep. One cave had a tunnel 800 feet long with 14 separate exits. It was one of hundreds designed to be defended in depth. As the Americans soon discovered, each fighting position contained the commander's courageous battle vows, prominently posted above the firing apertures. Troops were admonished to maintain their positions and exact 10 American lives for every Japanese death. And don't think these positions were cooler because they were in the shaded underground. Because of the volcanic activity, many of the tunnels are actually 20 degrees warmer than outdoor temperatures. I cannot fathom what it must have been like living in them.
Here, you like some sunblock?
Sure.
There you go.
Peace on Earth. May these peace prevail on Earth signs are all over the Pacific in a lot of the battlefields. It was a major project that went all over when they were doing collecting of the remains. Thank you.
Would you like to just hang on to in case you need more? Okay.
This Japanese naval airman was positioned at this point to make sure we didn't veer off the designated route. Even though we had 7 hours to explore the island, we were confined to the eastern shoreline leading to Suribachi.
Konnichiwa. O genki desu ka? Atsui ne. Hi, hi.
As we were quick to find out, the Japanese were very strict about COVID-19 precautions during our visit. Upon landing, we remained on the plane for 40 minutes so all our temperatures could be taken. This was a bit of a cautionary overkill in our view, and was definitely a bit of culture shock to we generally carefree Yanks.
Oh, coming both ways.
This is the turn to the quarry that is not posted this year. really want to get in trouble, but that's the quarry. That goes right down to the blockhouse in the base of the quarry. It's the big gun that was controlling Blue 2, and because it was not knocked out yet, we couldn't land on Blue 2, and it remained hot for the first week of the battle. Unfortunately, it was right where the 4th Marine Division had to close the hinge across the center of the island.
Blue Beach 2 lay directly under the observation and fire of suspected Japanese positions in the rock quarry, whose steep cliffs overshadowed the right flank, like Suribachi dominated the left. The 4th Marine Division figured that the 25th Marines would have the hardest objective to take on D-Day. General Clifton Cates said of the situation, "If I knew the name of the man on the extreme right of the right-hand squad, I'd recommend him for a medal before we go in."
It's an area up here on the right that the volcanic activity is still really hot, so there's not a lot of stuff that grows there. See this gorge going down? It goes right down to the beach.
There was a lot less vegetation here in 1945. Months of aerial bombings made the place resemble a lunar landscape. With all the explosions, one Marine said the island resembled Dante's Inferno.
I didn't know what it was, and then once I saw you looking at it.
Thank you.
I briefly lost my microphone here, but it was rescued by one of my fellow historians, Dr. Brianne Robertson. whose work was foundational in correcting historical misconceptions about the famous Iwo Jima flag-raising photo. For that, and rescuing my mic, we all owe her a debt of gratitude.
I believe it was.
An exaggeration?
Yeah, James said it was more like 5. Yeah.
That makes more sense given that the island's only 8 square miles.
Yeah, it's only 4.5 north south.
Well, but you know, with curves.
Seeing the water bottles on our backpacks warrants mentioning that the only water we had was what we could carry. I had 4 bottles of water, electrolyte packets, and chewing gum. This was not the fault of our tour company. Rather, we were at the mercy of the Marines and our Japanese hosts.
So this entire area through here stays volcanically active so badly that nothing can grow out here. It's been like this every year since I've got here. You see down here it gets superheated and it starts to burn. Down there is blue too. I have no idea what that is sticking out of the sand. I'm not sure if you can zoom in on that. There's so many landing craft that went in, and the base of the landing craft have got a differential in them that a lot of times when they flipped on their side, that piece was the last piece to erode. So they stick up out of the sand, but it depends on what storms have come through and how much wave action they've had in the last couple of years. All that land you see right there would have been underwater on the day of the battle. So the island has risen over 30 feet since the day of the attack here. So a lot of what you see out in the sands is actually stuff that sank, got embedded on the side of the volcano, has been moved around a lot. But some of that stuff is now visible whenever the tide moves. It's kind of like the sunken ships on the Oregon coast in the United States, where every 30, 40, 50 years, one becomes exposed and you get to see a ship that's been there for 150, 200 years. So you see that plateau, that's Motoyama. So as you come through the airfields up above, it's pretty much the exact same thing the soldiers would have seen as they came up over these berms. They see a plateau in front of them. Aircraft pushed off to the side, kind of like you see with the rubble thrown off to the side now. But the airfield, of course, is flat and it's swept by machine gun bullets. And the only way to take it was to run across it. Keep your eyes peeled, you'll find bullets laying around here, chunks of metal, pieces of shrapnel. Stuff's kind of everywhere. Nice little chunks. So you'll see these that have peeled off of a round as it came through and flying through the air. It goes right through a guy. Chunk of shrapnel. You'll see bullets over here if you keep your eyes peeled. Hasn't been anybody walking this on an annual basis for a while, so you might see more than what we normally see.
Yeah.
But they never have paved this. They always just bladed it. Suribachi's paved, but some concrete over there.
The debris of battle was everywhere. Here is a second photo of a round we later picked up near the road. We were practically kicking up spent shell casings and shrapnel in the road. As the battle eventually pushed toward the bitter end, small arms wounds began to outnumber high explosive shrapnel hits. The persistent myth among some Marine units that Japanese troops were all nearsighted and hence poor marksmen ended for good at Iwo Jima. In the close quarters fighting among the Badlands of northern Iwo Jima, Japanese riflemen dropped hundreds of advancing Marines with well-aimed shots to the head or chest. "Poor marksmen," snorted Captain Frank Cadwell of the 26th Marines. "The Japs we faced all fired expert." These were the American pilots who flew in U.S. personnel for the reunion. No Americans are stationed on the island. Iwo was returned to the Japanese in 1968 in the name of strengthening Cold War alliances. In other words, I think America was willing to make concessions to Asian allies as the Vietnam War raged.
So this is just inland from the 4th Division's landing beach. Kind of the middle north part of Motoyama 1. So these small shrub trees are called Leucaena glauca. In the Chamorro language, we call them tongan tongan. Sometimes they're named as tangan tangan. If you're fresh off the boat. Extremely fast growing legume that just takes over an entire area. If it's not removed, the taps go down very deep. So the taproots can go down up to 10 feet deep on a very small tree.
I wonder if that was another bit of shrapnel he found. Like I said, the stuff is just everywhere. Hiking the island was almost like walking through an old crime scene. There was evidence of violence at every turn.
So now imagine you've got a pack on. You're being shot at. And there's no place to hide.
Every man on Iwo felt vulnerability, but not all could allow fear to consume them. Medal of Honor recipient Herschel Williams recalled, "Everybody has some instinct of bravery, and as long as they can control the fear, you can be brave. But if fear overtakes you and becomes the dominant instinct, you cannot operate. Your brain won't let you." Seeing all these generals being hauled around in their white vans as the rest of us walked made me think about Bill Malden GI cartoons. Rank surely does have its privileges.
Can't lose you two. How you going? Good.
Hello.
How are you?
Just Andy.
I love it. Our little crew is actually going to be the first on Suribachi. Woohoo! Until we get passed by a car.
They cheated.
Yeah. So each one of these monuments are to the brigade or the battalion that was defending this location and took the full assault of the invasion, coming up on the intersection between what would be 4th and 5th, landing abreast.
Mount Suribachi is now clearly in sight. The Japanese called the dormant volcano Suribachi Yama. The Marines dubbed it Hot Rocks. From the start, the Marines knew their drive north would never succeed without first seizing that hulking rock dominating the southern plain. Suribachi seemed to take on a life of its own, watching these men looming over them, recalled one observer, adding, "The mountain represented to these Marines a thing more evil than the Japanese."
So that's the reunion of honor site that you can see ahead in the blue tents, porta potties. That's just inland from a very, very cool pillbox.
As I walked the ground, I could not help but think of Clint Eastwood's two magnificent films that chronicled this battle. Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima comprise an impressive cinematic set that examines the fight from both perspectives. The movies are quite authentic and offer a genuine sense of empathy for the men who had the misfortune of fighting over this unforgiving terrain. If you cannot visit Iwo yourself, those films are fine secondary options. In his review of the movies, Roger Ebert wrote, "In both his films, Eastwood empathizes with the expendable soldier on the ground, the poor bastard who is only a pawn in a war conceived by generals and politicians, some of whom have never come anywhere near a battlefield or a combat zone."
We did a lot of float trips because I grew up in Missouri. So I was used to it, but we'd go down to like Springfield area and just float down there and it just didn't really think about whether the river's big. There were some trips where you said one time dragging across the sandbar to get home again, you know. So you actually do rapids? You do whitewater often?
Not a whole lot.
I've never done anything like that.
So this is a divisional cemetery marker. We'll come back to this on the way back down the mountain. But this is where we had the 4th Division cemeteries. And then down further will be the 5th Division cemetery.
The Marine cemeteries for the 3rd and 4th Divisions were established side by side, not far from Airfield No. 1. The interments included Marine war dogs who were killed in action, some of whom now rest in a special cemetery that I visited in Guam. The slain of the 5th Marines were buried closer to Mount Suribachi. The process of cataloging, identifying, and burying the dead was overwhelming in its details and emotional weight. Seabees eventually constructed fences around the plots from salvaged crates. They then built stone arches at entry points. The dead men were eventually returned to stateside national cemeteries or family plots after the war. I suspect you might even find one of them at rest in your own local cemetery.
It's a gun.
At first glance, some artillery barrels just looked like discharge pipes sticking out of the ground because the caves had collapsed around the guns. For this reason, we were told not to go cave exploring.
So the division has made it across the berm. They're starting to work their way up towards Motoyama. And you come into these scarp lines. And each one of these scarp lines is heavily defended. And then there's another layer on top of them going up to the airfield. So Motoyama is the first one repaired. That's the airfield that we initially start using for close-in air support.
You didn't
And the 7th fighters come in. They're P-51s. Night fighters were based down here. And then on the north part of the field, P-51s. And then once we took field number 2, we moved the fighters up there and used this field initially for the divert field, and then they expanded field 2 for the B-29s because it was a better, longer run. Provided many more feet.
As we approached the Reunion of Honor monument on the road to Suribachi, I had to place my jacket back on. To be at this site before or during the ceremony without a sports jacket is considered to be an insult by the Japanese. Since we were their guests, we did as we were told. The monument we see to the right was dedicated by the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Division Associations on February 19, 1985. The text on it reads, "On the 40th anniversary of the Battle of Iwo Jima, American and Japanese veterans met again on these same sands, this time in peace and friendship. We commemorate our comrades, living and dead, who fought here with bravery and honor, and we pray that together our sacrifices on Iwo Jima will always be remembered and never repeated." Due to our crunch time, we had to choose between attending the Reunion of Honor or hiking to the top of Suribachi. Because I had the opportunity to talk with several of the Iwo veterans in the days prior, I opted to hike the mountain. The veterans I talked to in depth included Louis Borgal, who I chatted with at length on Guam. As it turns out, he volunteers as a docent on the USS North Carolina, which my own grandfather served on at war's end. Louis told me that he might be the last person alive who saw the battleship's big guns be fired in battle. I also had a great interaction with another veteran. After a day of touring Guam, I ventured to the beachside grill at our hotel. To my surprise, I didn't spot any gatherings from our tour group. To even greater astonishment, I noticed a World War II veteran sitting by himself eating a hamburger. I somewhat hesitantly approached and asked if I could join him. I'm sure glad I did. This is Nils Mockler, Iwo Jima survivor and veteran of the 4th Marine Division. I didn't press him on his wartime experiences. We merely shared pleasantries and talked about our travels. Then he opened up about Iwo Jima, slowly pausing between bites of hamburger as thoughts of 78 years ago came to mind. Most poignant of all were his thoughts on a Japanese native who moved into Nils' neighborhood decades after the war. The man was a childhood survivor of Allied bombings. Nils became good friends with the neighbor and expressed his relief that the man did not die from American bombs in his youth. When I offered to pay the bill at Mill's End, Nils gave me a firm no and insisted he pay for himself. That level of almost fierce independence is a common trait among World War II veterans I have spoken to. After finishing his beer, I guided him back to the hotel. Quite a dinner. At the reunion, historian Dan King made a very special gesture. His book, A Tomb Called Iwo Jima, is the definitive account of the battle from the Japanese perspective. This day, he returned a soldier's Japanese flag back to his countrymen at the ceremony. One cannot underestimate the value of such diplomatic kindness. Even though I missed the Reunion of Honor, some highlights of it were filmed by the Marine Corps. We'll share that footage right now.
We gather with great reverence and grave remembrance of the history of these hallowed grounds. The Battle of Iwo Jima and Iwo II was one of the deadliest fought during World War II. The purpose of our presence at this solemn ceremony is to ensure that the legacy of lives lost,
Ready, cut!
what President Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion, is never lost on the living, to ensure the souls of the sacrificed are eternally honored, to reaffirm and renew a commitment to peace.
In the silence of this island, the very silence of this island, They and their bereaved families are honored and esteemed for what they did and for what they endured.
There isn't a Marine on this earth who doesn't know what happened on these shores. Those Marines learned lessons of courage and honor and discipline and perseverance from both Marines and sailors and Japanese service members alike. And while this island may have divided us in 1945, I'd like to think that in some way it helps unite us today. And as formidable as both forces were some 78 years ago, we are even more formidable together today. As the actions of those who fought and died on Iwo Jima recede into history, we keep these men alive with our traditions, where they continue to serve our countries by shaping the values, the character, and the very soul of a new generation of warriors.
Nice to meet you, sir. It's an honor. Thank you, sir.
What have you found? All kinds of stuff. We were in the caves, so in the caves there's still, the rifles are still in there. You find crates of grenades, mortar rounds, little medicine bottles, little vials. So they used to use these little vials about this tall that would snap off. They had cocaine in them for dentistry, so they would numb the gums. Golf ball. That's a long ways from the driving range.
I heard one story about Americans at a reunion hitting golf balls off the top of Suribachi. I have no idea how they smuggled golf clubs onto the island. Naturally, this did not endear we Americans to the Japanese.
A range ball, yeah. Oh, it is a range ball. You want your ball? You okay with this?
Yep.
We'll leave it for everybody else to discover. Oh, look! I guarantee that won't be there on the way back either. Somebody will pick up.
First person will tell.
Somebody will pick that up.
Like, they shot the only from the Suribachi.
That's a 1944 Titleist. General Erskine was really into golf.
Speaking of golf, one of the most avid golfers to ever visit the island was none other than Dwight Eisenhower, though this didn't happen during World War II. In December 1952, a month after being elected and a month before being inaugurated president, Ike set out for an inspection of Korea as that conflict was underway. He bummed a jeep ride to the top of Mount Suribachi and had several photos taken where the famous flag-raising photos were snapped nearly 8 years prior. Pretty cool story. Thanks to my friend Ranger Dan Vermilia at Eisenhower National Historic Site in Gettysburg for introducing me to this tale.
Actually, Sandy.
Yeah, that's about
Tiny.
That's true. Not using it for 9 years and only in like soup bars, restaurants or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, it's a true story. Well,
Yes, I was getting a bit tired here. This was a fine reminder of how out of shape I was. Yet this was nothing when considering the pain and heartache men endured here in battle. As I walked alone, I was reminded of the first-hand account of Navy Corpsman Fred Brinkman. Fred served with my grandfather on the beach landing party of the USS Lowndes, a Haskell-class attack transport on which my grandfather worked as a signalman. In this excerpt, Fred wrote to his father about the first day of the battle and the fate of a comrade. Just after noon, things got hotter than ever before. Just behind us was a battered Jap pillbox, which had been smashed in. But suddenly a Jap sniper poked his head out of a hole and opened fire with his rifle. Don Bowman was only feet away, giving plasma to a wounded Marine. Don never knew what happened. He had been our leader and performed a job that couldn't be surpassed by anyone. He gave the supreme sacrifice, but he won't be forgotten. I was just next to Don when he was hit. He fell against me and knocked me down. The Jap continued to fire, and a couple of other guys were wounded. Had it not been for Don, I would have been directly in his line of fire. Of course, the nip didn't last long. Everybody who saw him opened up with their rifles. I grabbed my carbine, and even though about 10 other guys must have hit him first, I kept my finger on that trigger until my ammunition clip was empty. I'll bet enough shells went into that Jap to keep every hunter from St. Louis supplied for one season. After we had ceased firing, I was so mad, I jammed the butt of my rifle into his face as hard as I could. That's where my gold tooth came from. This is an excerpt that certainly underscores the grisly nature of up-close and personal combat on Iwo Jima. But as I will explain later, the death of Bowman was something that never left my grandfather. By this point, only a few additional people had passed me as I took a break. Many had opted to attend the reunion only, and skip the longer and more arduous hike to the top of the mountain. It was apparent to all of us who made it this far, though, that nothing was going to stop us from reaching the summit.
What's that? You guys go ahead. I'm going to take a break.
I have not made the chance. Oh, that is a great gun.
I'm going to take a break, yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Lyric.
The Marine I met here was a very helpful fellow. Even though he had no water to offer, he did have a small cooler and offered me ice chips. I gave him an Iwo Jima Reunion Challenge coin as an expression of my thanks. Later on, some Japanese airmen joined him here, and I snapped this great photo of one of them giving me a thumbs up in the background. I left my sports jacket hanging on a tree branch and planned to retrieve it once I'd descended the mountain. The jacket was soaking wet, covered in dirt and sunblock. The dry cleaner did wonders with it when I got home.
Certainly a lot more vegetation here now than what there was in 1945. Of course, the Navy had been heavily shelling all of this, and it had the Army Air Forces. And so it's not quite as bleak and desolate as it was. I'll tell you what, it is still pretty rugged out here.
During the hike, thoughts shifted to the Japanese defenders. Occasionally, Kurabayashi authorized company-size spoiling attacks to recapture lost terrain or disrupt enemy assault preparations. These were not suicidal or sacrificial. Most were prepared by stinging artillery and mortar fires and aimed at limited objectives. Kurabayashi's iron will generally kept his troops from large-scale, wasteful banzai attacks until the last days of the battle. But one also has to think in terms of the personal. What was going through the minds of the defenders? Historian Dan King offers some insight in his book, A Tomb Called Iwo Jima. One of the combatants featured is Shiruki Akakusa, a naval radioman stationed on the island. King writes, "But as more and more vehicles and boats arrived, he grew worried. The Marines were digging in down at the water's edge. There were so many of them," said Akakusa. "It reminded me of a crowd of baseball fans waiting for the stadium to open. I saw their numbers swell from several hundred to a few thousand. Each new wave piled on top of the last one," he said. He was worried that the lack of concentrated counterfire meant that the Americans would overrun the island. Why weren't our big guns firing, he thought.
So the sea beast put in this road. It was paved. It's still paved. And it is a 10% grade the whole way up. Quite the feat of engineering.
One of my truly surreal moments was just around this bend.
Wow, and look at this. It's so imposing.
As I was alone, this was where the setting started to feel eerie. I felt almost as if I was being watched. After brief moments of solitude, I was glad to see fellow travelers working their way to the top. I could only imagine what was beneath these rocks and vegetation. The whole mountain is a tomb. I had no idea what I might stumble across. On a brighter note, I was quite eager to interact with fellow visitors and learn why they had decided to journey to this place, just as I had.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, in the shade. Just a little bit of a breeze. That helps.
So how many times have you folks been here?
First time.
First time.
All right.
Tell, we're winning.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
don't know what we're doing.
Rookies.
How about you?
This is my first time as well.
All right. I just feel honored to be able to come here. It's great. Yeah.
Certainly gives us a sense of empathy.
Right. We're just hot and sweaty from walking. They
Yeah.
battle.
I can't even begin to fathom.
Yeah. They talked about the first day they were on the beach, it was actually cold and raining. They were burrowing holes in the sand because it was warm because of the volcanic warmth down below. And so that's what they were doing
That
to
was in
keep warm.
February. Yeah.
Right.
So come July.
Oh boy.
Indeed. How goes it?
What a great time.
It is. It's not in the shade.
Look at that view, though. How goes it, young man?
I'm blind.
It's hard to see though sometimes. All right. How you doing?
Good. I think that's how you do it. Maybe back when we stepped in to see the caves.
Yeah.
Which one, cave?
Yeah,
Well, we
just
stayed at
monuments.
the entrance to it.
Yeah, so come down.
Please.
All right, here we go.
We'll look on the way back.
How you faring?
All right. Just thought it'd be sensible to stop. I haven't stopped
Yeah.
since I tucked away my jacket and went in and took a leak.
I left my jacket down at the marine tent.
What did you?
Yeah, I'll pick it up on the way back.
For a moment, I envisioned the vast naval armada out on those waters. Aboard one of those ships was my own grandfather. Just about a week before the landings, my grandfather had an appendectomy aboard his ship. He therefore watched the entire battle from the deck of the Lowndes. As my family has reminded me on more than one occasion, he very well may have been killed on the island with several of his comrades, had not appendicitis nearly done him in first. Who exactly were my travel mates? I found that most of them were the children of veterans who fought here, or were Marine veterans themselves. At age 35, I was one of the youngest civilian attendees to visit the island. I, for one, cannot wait to share this footage in the classroom with my students. But regardless of age or station, everybody had a profound reason for embarking on this hike. In fact, it was more than a hike. It was a pilgrimage. As I slowly approach the top, I can now finally start to get a view of the broader island. Looking back on the ocean, I am reminded of the words of Corpsman Fred Brinkman. The whole ocean around Iwo was covered with ships. The waters around the APAs were now completely covered with boats loaded with Marines. About 0900, the first wave of boats headed for the beach. Along the beach, a few Jap luggers and landing ships were smashed to hell. All battle wagons, cans, and cruisers, and smaller craft were pouring a continuous barrage of shells into every part of the island. From Mount Suribachi on the southern tip to the rugged mountains on the northern end, the entire island was in smoke.
So surreal being here, walking atop this mass tomb. Like so many battlefields, it's so eerily quiet.
I think I'll just sit right here in the breeze.
Don't blame me.
Came all this way, just sit right here.
Yeah, right.
Just imagine what's beneath all this vegetation.
Right?
Right.
Wow. That's a thought right there.
We're getting there.
I hope so.
There you go.
Approaching one of the final switchbacks, I met up with one of the airline attendees who had visited here during previous reunions.
I'll join you.
I need to cool down a little bit.
Yeah. So what's the most revealing thing thus far?
Pardon?
What's the most revealing aspect so far?
I can do more than I think I can, but I don't need to be foolish about it. I did this 7 years ago. It wasn't quite so hard.
Yeah.
We're lucky that it's not hotter.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Something wonderful to take back to your kids.
Yes. So here we are. We're about 3/4 of the way up, and it is quite the hike.
Well, I saw the post up there, so I'm even thinking a little bit farther than that. That'll be good.
Slowly but surely, more fellow travelers joined us near the top. I felt compelled to film some of them as they made the final push.
Hello.
Good for you.
Hello.
One more switchback, I take it.
I think so, yeah. Here we are, the Everest of battlefields.
Ah, yes.
In fact, one guide informed me that since World War II, more people have climbed Mount Everest than Mount Suribachi. If that's true, it certainly speaks to the remoteness of Iwo Jima.
I won't be able to get back up.
I'll help you. There you go.
Should have anyway. Yeah. All right.
We'll fall down into a cave.
Yeah, back of the seat don't work very well.
Yeah. I told you to stay out of the cave.
Have you been here before?
Nope, that's why I wanted to get to the top. And
Yeah.
I would want to do the ceremony so bad, but.
Yeah.
And then I still need to get sand, and I'm jeopardizing that now.
How long were you in the Corps?
4 years.
All right.
68, 52, or 68, 72.
Well, welcome to Iwo.
Yeah. You hear about it all the time in the Corps.
Yeah.
And I personally know, well, he doesn't probably remember me, he wouldn't, but I've met Gordy Herschel several times, talked to him a few times. And so that's the other reason for wanting to go to the top for him.
Right on. All right.
Okay.
How to get set. I'm here when you get back.
All right. I give you a hand.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're almost there.
We're almost there.
You got water? Yep. Huh?
Yes.
All right, I got Pedialyte.
Okay.
Okay. Final trek.
The gentleman who we just heard speak is a Marine veteran from California named Rick. His story underscores the sacred place Iwo has in the annals of the Corps. I was honored to be at his side on this special day. Semper Fi, Marine. Here we are at the final bend to the peak. By Friday, February 23, 1945, the 28th Marines stood poised to complete the capture of Mount Suribachi. The honor went to 3rd Platoon, Company E, 2nd Battalion, under the command of 1st Lieutenant Harold C. Schreier. the company executive officer. Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson ordered Schreier to scale the summit, secure the crater, and raise a 54 by 28-inch American flag for all to see. Schreier led his 40-man patrol forward at 0800. The regiment had done its job, blasting the dozens of pillboxes with flame and demolitions, rooting out snipers, knocking out the massed batteries. The combined arms pounding by planes, field pieces, and naval guns over the past week had likewise taken its toll on the defenders. Those who remained popped out of the holes and caves to resist Schreier's advance, only to be cut down. The Marines worked warily up the steep northern slope, sometimes resorting to crawling on hands and knees. I certainly wasn't in such bad shape, but I was glad to finally reach my destination. Sandbags remain here, though this time to cover up cracks in the paved roadway. To my right is the large caldera of the volcano. The final steps to an absolutely sublime view. And here, too, I reconnected with James.
The original, that's where they raised the flag.
Oh, I take a picture of that. Hold on, finish this.
Okay, you want the best? Once you're done with that.
How you been?
My stomach started killing me. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
You're not stupid to stop. That's the smart thing to do. Ease it up.
Yep.
If you think I'm a weakling for needing a rest after that hike, you are probably correct. In any case, taking a seat allowed me to absorb the moment and the vista. As I rested, I noticed that the American flagpole had been taken down and only the Japanese flag flies atop Suribachi now. A very different scenario played out 78 years prior. Part of the enduring drama of the Suribachi flag raising was the fact that it was observed by so many people. Marines all over the island could track the progress of the tiny column of troops during its ascent. "Those guys ought to be getting flight pay," said one observer. Likewise, hundreds of binoculars from ships offshore watched Schreier's Marines climbing ever upward. Finally, they reached the top and momentarily disappeared from view. Those closest to the volcano could hear distant gunfire. Then, at 10:20, there was movement on the summit. Suddenly, the stars and stripes fluttered atop the massive landform. Lusty cheers rang out from all over the southern end of the island. The ships sounded their sirens and whistles. Wounded men propped themselves up on their litters to glimpse the sight. Navy Secretary Forstall, thrilled by that sight, turned to Holland Smith and said, "The raising of that flag means a Marine Corps for another 500 years. Perhaps he was right. For the first time, I can see the black ash beaches below. You can also see the airfield we walked from in the far distance.
Thank goodness for walls, right?
Here I'm reminded there's a 1 in 3 chance of Iwo undergoing a major eruption within the century. If this happens, it will destroy the island and unleash a massive tsunami. But enough of the doom and gloom. Let's go take a closer look at these monuments. The Japanese memorials, sleek and simple, pay tribute to the 20,000-some defenders who lost their lives. If you have additional information on these, I welcome you to share the details in the comments section below. The Marine Memorial at the top was built of concrete shortly after the battle by Seabees in the 31st Naval Construction Battalion, the same men who carved out the road I hiked up. As you can see, various tokens are left behind, including rusty artifacts found on the field and mementos left by modern-day visitors. Right behind the monument is the exact location where the U.S. flag was raised during the battle. 3 hours after the first flag was hoisted, an even larger flag went up mostly unnoticed by those below. Few would know that Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal had just captured the embodiment of the American warfighting spirit on film. Leatherneck magazine photographer Staff Sergeant Lou Lowry had taken a picture of the first flag raising and almost immediately got caught in a firefight with enraged Japanese. His photograph would become a valued collector's item, but Rosenthal's would inspire the free world. As Rosenthal noted in his oral history interview, "My stumbling on that picture was, in all respects, accidental. When he got to the top of the mountain, he stood in a decline just below the crest of the hill with Marine Sergeant William Janoust, a movie cameraman who was killed later in the campaign. They watched a group of Marines fasten the new flag to another piece of pipe. Rosenthal said that he turned from Janoust and, out of the corner of his eye, saw the second flag being raised. He said, 'Hey, Bill, there it goes.' He continued, 'I swung my camera around and held it until I could guess that this was the peak of the action, and then shot.'" Professors Matthew Pressman and James Kimball attest to the significance of the photo. Although it was 700 miles from Tokyo, the rocky island was administered as part of the Tokyo Prefecture. This circumstance encouraged the press to say that the assault on Iwo Jima represented the beginning of the Battle of Japan. All of these factors contributed to the rapturous reception that greeted Rosenthal's photograph. No wonder, then, that the photo appeared so widely and so prominently. The final victory over Japan must have seemed to be closer than ever. However, the Battle of Iwo Jima itself was not even over. It raged on for another month after the flag raising, through late March, and several of the men involved in the photo were killed before the fighting was done. Even so, Rosenthal's photo became synonymous with the war effort, won the Pulitzer Prize, and galvanized the nation. Though it took 75 years to properly identify every man in Rosenthal's photo, the image's meaning remains unchanged. On my way back down, I started taking still photos. After posing at the Marine Memorial myself, I began the long descent. As you can see, many visitors hauled American flags to the top to raise them and later present them as souvenirs. In my pocket were the Navy dog tags that bear my grandfather's name. I pulled them out and read a letter my pap wrote to my grandmother. It states, "Do you remember the 19th of February at Iwo Jima? Well, I was there. I didn't have to go in with the beach party. They had it pretty bad. My best buddy was killed, Don Bowman. I was on the deck when the beach party was loading, and Don said to me, 'Here, Dave, I don't think I'm coming back.' He gave me his billfold, keys to his locker, and penknife. When I found out what happened on the island, I turned his possessions to my division officer. I had my mother have a mass for him at home. Before he was killed, I helped Bowman administer first aid to some of the fellows who were injured. It certainly was an awful little island, about one of the smallest under the sun." My grandfather died when I was 8 years old. I never had the chance to talk to him about any of this. But during my day on Iwo Jima, I never felt closer to him. Debris still litters that awful little island he described. On the western shore, I spotted cement ships that had been sunk to act as breakwaters. It was incredible to see these even from a distance. Unfortunately, time and restrictions did not allow us to explore that sector of the island. Speaking of ghosts, I thought I was seeing things when I spotted this man in uniform walking the ashen surface of the beach once I had reached the shoreline. I thought perhaps in my dehydrated state that I was hallucinating, but then I recognized the man as a member of our tour group. Quite the scene.
And so as one does here on Iwo Jima, take some black sand home. For all you about to get souvenirs from me, This is to verify that this is legit stuff.
Alright, I'm doing my best Sergeant Horvath impression here, and bringing home some sand, or volcanic ash rather, as a souvenir for some lucky friends and family members. This added another 5 pounds of weight to my backpack, and yes, the Japanese permitted us to take ash home. At the time of the battle, the beach was a cluttered mess. Iwo Jima was an emerging volcano. Its steep beaches dropped off sharply, producing a narrow but violent surf zone. The soft black sand immobilized all-wheeled vehicles and caused some of the tracked amphibians to belly down. The boat waves that closely followed the LVTs had even more trouble. Ramps would drop, a truck or jeep would attempt to drive out, only to get stuck. In short order, a succession of plunging waves hit the stalled craft before they could completely unload, filling their sterns with water and sand. The beach quickly resembled a salvage yard. The infantry, heavily laden, found its own foot mobility severely restricted. It's amazing anybody survived here. We are a History vs. Hollywood channel after all, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how well the movie Flags of Our Fathers does in capturing the chaos that unfolded on these now peaceful shores. I saw this movie on the big screen when it hit theaters, and it left an impact on me as great as Saving Private Ryan. Check it out.
So I'm working my way up the sands here, and it is quite difficult to climb. As one Marine said, which I think is quite accurate, it's like trying to climb up wet coffee grounds. And I am finding that out firsthand as we speak. So much so that I think I'm going to turn around and take the path rather than traversing the rest of the beach. So right now, I'm working my way up one of the sectors. And once again, this part here would have been underwater at the time. But a little bit further up here is the original beach.
From this perspective, it is useful to point out that Suribachi stands as tall as the Washington Monument. Quite the imposing height.
Is this way back to the trail? Well. What do we have here? We have here a is that in focus? I can't tell. Some piece of metal. Doubtly something from the war, perhaps. Perhaps I'll never know. It looks like a piece of rebar, maybe. I can't take it with me, though. They're right back where I found it.
That's the good old park ranger in me. Leave only footprints, take only photos. But in all seriousness, if I had been caught trying to smuggle that off the island, the Japanese could have detained me. Or so we were told. And I had 4 classes to get back to in just 3 days, so I wasn't going to risk it. The Japanese view relic scavenging as a form of desecration, so I decided it wasn't worth the gamble. As I climbed up the main road to return to the airport, I gained a strong sense of the undulations in the ground. The island is not at all flat. Ravines, gullies, terraces, and hillsides made the entire place an ambusher's delight. My hike seemed to be uphill both ways. General Holland Smith later wrote, "The size and terrain of the island precluded any forced beachhead line. It was an operation of one phase and one tactic. From the time the engagement was joined until the mission was completed, it was a matter of frontal assault maintained with relentless pressure by a superior mass of troops and supporting arms against a position fortified to the maximum practical extent." In other words, the entire battle was a constant sustained assault for over 1 month. A Japanese serviceman was assisting we American visitors at this intersection. In appreciation, I presented him a challenge coin. He was most appreciative, and we posed for this photo with Mount Suribachi in the background. His family could have fought against my own 80 years ago, yet here we were. I like to think this brief exchange was my small part in healing old war wounds. After this, I slowly but surely walked my way back to the airstrip and delighted in a much-needed bottle of Gatorade. My trip to Iwo reinforced a belief I have long held. If you want to understand a battle, you must walk the ground on which it took place.
So how many times have you been to Iwo Jima?
This is 14 or 15. I haven't added them up yet, but I think it's 15. So.
What do you seek each time you come here?
Depends. Depends on who's with me and if I've been asked to do something for the crew. Sometimes I'll take videographers around. Sometimes I'll just grab somebody that wants to go to a particular spot where a family member had served or where they need to return something maybe. And then other times it's just for my own personal edification. See? I can kill any camera.
And what did you see today?
Let's see, we did a quick hump up to Suribachi and made it up there before anyone else, which was nice. And did the cone and all around the monuments up on top. Then we took off and went down to Green Beach, showed them some caves that were right off the path that were very easy to see and get an understanding of the caves. Then down on the Green Beach itself, where we went hunting for the most important things, which are trash that washes in. But very good little find this year. We'll been here somewhere. The glass fish float.
There you go.
So these have been floating around in the Pacific. They used to have, they'd be tied into the top of the net and float the nets. They quit making those in the 1950s and 60s, but they still float around the Pacific today, and the winds blow them onto small islands like this. We found an enormous amount of plastic trash, which was pretty depressing.
Yeah.
but we walked from Green Beach all the way down to Yellow, came up in the pillbox with the melted machine gun inside, up to the Reunion Honor site, and then humped it back. So that was our day. 10.3 miles. So.
Well, that's excellent. Thank you for letting me be part of it.
Thanks for coming with us.
All right.
All right.
So you don't
Thank you.
say I was with him. That's the exact same thing.
That's it.
Everyone wave. Different episode of Real History. We hope you enjoyed this tour of this iconic World War II battlefield. This is Jared Frederick on Real History. Until we see you next time, stay curious.
You need to go get your passport.
And get your passport.